The morning of the auction, there were 90 rabbits nobody wanted. They came through last, in the thin gold end of the day, when the good stock had already been loaded and hauled off, and the men with money were leaning on their tailgates talking about supper. 90 runt silver-gray rabbits of an old homestead foraging strain, mange-scruffed and bony, their ribs standing up under the dull fur like the poles of a tent somebody had folded down wrong, culls off a rabbitry 2 counties over that had folded up itself, and boxed the leavings, and shipped them to the Sedgwick Flat sale barn to be somebody else's problem. They huddled in 3 wire pens along the low end of the alley, pressed into the corners the way an animal presses when it has learned that nothing coming toward it means it any good, and they did not so much as thump when a boot scuffed the boards. There is a kind of quiet that settles over a lot like that, and the auctioneer, a wiry, weathered man named Rayford Culpepper, who had run these pens longer than most of the crowd had been alive, knew that quiet the way a doctor knows a certain color in a face. He stood up on his low wooden block with the rolled sale sheet in one hand, and he read the number, and he read the breed, silver gray, heritage, 90 head, sold as 1 lot. And then he did the only honest thing a man in his place can do with a lot that will not carry. He let the silence answer. He did not chant it up. He did not sweeten it. He just waited, and the barn waited with him, and the dust hung gold in the last of the light coming sideways through the board gaps, and nobody raised a hand. Down by the good pens, where the fat young does had gone for real money an hour before, Vernon Hasseltine held court. He was a broad, prosperous cattleman somewhere in his early 60s, thick through the chest and thicker through the belly, a clean seed company cap set square on his head, and a pressed snap-button shirt on his back, and expensive boots on his feet, and he had his thumbs hooked in his belt loops the way a man does when he has decided the room belongs to him. He looked down the alley at those 3 pens of scruffy silver rabbits, and he laughed, not privately, but out loud, and for the benefit of the cap-wearing men around him, because a laugh like that is only worth having if it is shared. Now there, he said, there is a man's money going straight down a hole. Whoever buys that has bought himself 90 little funerals, and he'll be digging every one of them by Christmas. The men around him laughed the easy laugh that costs nothing, and it is set down here only as a fact offered for consideration, the way a thing said in passing on an ordinary evening can turn out later to have been the hinge the whole story swung on. And it was into that laughter, not through it and not against it, but simply past it, as if it were weather and not words, that Maribel Ridley came down the line. She was a lean, wiry young woman, sun-weathered and slight through the shoulders, in a faded blue chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled to the forearms and dark work jeans gone pale at the knees, her chestnut hair pulled back in a low, loose ponytail that spilled from under a sweat-stained brown cap with an old feed-store patch curling at the edge. She did not look at the men, and she did not look at the auctioneer. She went to the rail of the low pens, and she crouched down on her heels, easy and grounded, the way a person crouches who has spent a life close to the ground, and she settled her weight, and she looked. In the flap pocket of her shirt, squared and worn soft at the corners, was a cloth-bound ledger, and though she did not take it out just then, her hand went to it once the way a hand goes to a thing it trusts. She looked for a long time without saying anything. She was not reading those rabbits the way the auctioneer read them, or the way Vernon read them. She was not looking at the mange, or the thin, uneven fur, or the ribs, or rather, she was looking past all of that. At the frames underneath it, at the deep-chested, heavy-hipped that sat lowest and slowest in the back of the pens and did not startle, The ones a fast buyer skips because they look like they are already halfway to dead. She was reading not for the animals that would sell bright and quick tomorrow, but for the ones that would still be breathing in a hard year, the heaviest-bodied and the slowest-footed, the kind bred once upon a time to forage a dry hill and outlast a drought, and she found them one by one down the length of that pen, and she did not point, and she did not say. When she stood, her knees popped, and she went to Rayford Culpepper, and she told him she would take the lot. All of it, the whole 90. The auctioneer looked at her for a moment, the way an old man looks at a young one who has just said something that will cost them. And then he named a price so low it came out of him almost like an apology, a number that was less a sale than a way of being rid of the boxes, and she did not haggle it, and she did not flinch at it. She reached into her jeans, and she brought out a fold of cash, and she counted it into his hand bill on bill, flat and unhurried, the way you count when the money is real and there is a fixed amount of it, and no more coming. And Rayford took it without a word and made a mark on his sheet, and that was that. Behind her, Vernon Hasseltine watched a slip of a girl pay hard cash for 90 head of what he had just called dog food, and he shook his head slow, and he said it again for the men, quieter now but sure, that it was money down a hole and 90 little funerals, and she would be digging them by Christmas. He had meant it as a prediction of failure. It would turn out to be a prediction of something else entirely. If this is the kind of story you stay for, the kind where a woman like Maribel is proven right the slow, patient way, do me a small favor. Tap the like button and subscribe, and in the comments, tell me the town or city you're watching from, because I read every single one. Now, let's begin. Because the truth of it, the part Vernon could not have known standing there in his clean cap, was that Maribel Ridley had not come home because she had a plan. She had come home because there was nowhere left that was asking for her, and one place that was. The city life she had built with both hands had come quietly apart over a single gray winter, not in a crash, but in a slow letting go, the way a rope lets go one fiber at a time until the last one parts and you find you are holding nothing. The job had folded under her, a small firm gone to a larger one that had no use for her desk. The lease on the little apartment had not been renewed, for reasons given in a form letter that were not really reasons. And on a Tuesday that had looked like any other Tuesday, she had set the keys down on the kitchen counter of a place that had never quite been hers, and she had driven out of it, and no one had come to the window to watch her go. What was asking for her was up a long dirt lane in the hill country where she had spent the summers of her childhood, her great-aunt Ozella, the last of the old Ridleys left on that ground, failing alone in the farmhouse of Maribel's dead grandfather Willard, too proud to say she needed anyone, and too honest to pretend she didn't when Maribel called. So it was obligation and not ambition that carried her up that lane, the truck laboring in the ruts, past the leaning gray barn with its whitewash peeled to bare wood, past the dead ochre pasture cracked open in the low places, past the hand-cut stone trough her grandfather's grandfather had set into the earth, past the vintage Ford pickup sitting up on its rims in the weeds and composing, slowly and with great patience, its own obituary. Ozella was on the porch when Maribel came up, a small, narrow woman in her 80s, with white hair loosely pinned and a face weathered kind and deeply lined, the same wiry Ridley bone that ran through Maribel herself, and she was shelling peas into a chipped enamel bowl, and she did not rise. Maribel sat down on the step below her and told her, because there was no one else to tell, and because it was already done and could not be untold, the whole foolish thing, the auction, the 3 pens down the low end, the 90 scruffy silver rabbits nobody would bid on, the cash counted flat into Rayford Culpepper's hand. She told it plainly, and she waited for the old woman to tell her she had thrown good money after a bad idea, which was what she half believed herself. Ozella shelled a pea. She looked out at the dead pasture and the gold going long across it, and she was quiet for a while, and then she said only, "Those are the ones." She did not explain it. Elders on that hill did not explain. They said the thing and left you to grow into it. That night the single bulb over the kitchen table gave one last brown flicker and died, and Marable went hunting a candle stub in the dark, opening drawers by feel, and it was in the deep drawer beside the dry sink, under a coil of twine and a box of dead matches, that her fingers found the ledger. She knew it for what it was before she had it fully in the light, cloth-bound, thick, the cover gone soft and dark with handling, the corners rounded off by decades of her grandfather's pocket. She lit the candle, and she sat down and she opened it, and Willard Ridley's whole patient mind lay open under her hands. Columns of weather going back further than she was old, the rain measured to the 10th, and the first frost dated, and the killing droughts marked with a heavier stroke. Tallies of kindlings and hatch counts, does named and numbered, litters brought through, and litters lost, and maps, hand-drawn maps of the hill in his careful pencil, the pasture divided into a wheel of paddocks with arrows showing an order, a slow clockwise turning, ground rested and ground worked in a rotation he had kept in his head and set down here so it would not die with him. She turned back toward the front, and there, near the beginning, was a single line he had underlined so hard the pencil had nearly gone through the paper, pressed down the way a man presses when he wants a thing remembered. The breeds people gave up on are the ones that will matter. She read it 3 times, and when she lifted her eyes from it, the candle throwing its small warm light up the wall, she saw the photograph. It had been hanging there the whole of her childhood, and she had never once looked at it, a tin-framed sepia thing gone foxed and pale, of Willard as a young man, lean and unsmiling and square-shouldered in the very same posture she carried in her own body, standing in the very same barnyard she had just driven past, and thick around his boots. So many they blurred at the edges of the old exposure, sat rabbits, silver-gray rabbits, the same heavy-chested foraging strain, the same breed, the same animal she had counted out flat cash for that afternoon 2 counties from where it had come. The strain that had fed this hill, she understood now, standing there with the ledger open in one hand and the candle guttering in the other. The strain that had carried the Ridleys through the dry years, that had broken the neighbors and emptied the farms up and down the Sedgwick Road. She had not bought 90 runt rabbits at all. She had bought her grandfather's animals, come back around to her on the same wind that had scattered them, set down last in a dusty pen for anyone to take, and taken by the one person left alive who would know them for what they were. She did not sleep much that night, and in the gray of the morning she went out and coaxed the obituary truck into starting, which it did on the 3rd try and with complaint, and she drove it down to the feed store in town. She did not buy grain, and she did not buy medicine. Not that day. She went to the shelf by the register, and she bought one thing, a plain notebook, cloth-bound, in a dull green near the color of the ledger her grandfather had carried, and a pencil to go with it. And that evening, back on the hill with the lantern lit, she opened her own new book to its first clean page, and she copied down the first method she meant to follow, in her own hand, the way you copy a thing to make it yours. She wrote it slow, and when she had it down, she went back over the words and she bore down hard with the pencil, pressing the line into the page the way he had pressed his, so that whoever came after her would know she had meant it, find the heaviest ones with the slowest feet. She began the next morning the way she meant to go on, which was slow. She took the ledger out to the pasture in the gray of first light, and she stood at the top of the hill with it open in both hands, and she read the Warren map her grandfather had drawn there in a country boy's careful pencil. The old paddocks marked out in a wheel across the slope, each one lettered, each one with a little date beside it in a hand that had faded to the color of weak tea. Willard had run them clockwise. She could see it in the numbers, the way he had moved his rabbits from the high dry ground down along the eastern fence and around the bottom where the runoff kept the grass a little longer, and then back up the western side to rest, so that no square of that hill was ever worked twice before it had the time to answer. She did not understand all of it yet. But she trusted the hand that had drawn it more than she trusted anything she might have thought up on her own, and so she did not improve it. She copied it. She stepped it off with her boots the way you learn a dance you cannot yet feel, counting her paces against his marks, and she set her first light fencing where his lines said to set it, and she turned the silver-gray rabbits out onto the tall grass and let them go. They knew what to do with it. That was the thing that took her breath the first week, watching them. She had half expected to have to teach them to be animals again after wherever they had been. But the foraging was bred so deep into the old strain that it had survived even the folded-up rabbitry and the sail barn and the long ribs, and they spread out low across the dry hill and put their heads down into the tall grass and ate the way their kind had eaten on that same ground before she was born. She fed them scant on top of it. That was the part that went against everything a person's hands wanted to do. Because a person's hands wanted to fill the trough and see the animals come running and feel like a good and generous God, and she made herself not do it. She fed them a little, and she let the hill feed them the rest, because the ledger said the breed did not want to be fed fat. The ledger said in Willard's hand that a rabbit fed soft forgot how to be hardy in one generation, and she believed him. She took on no debt to do it. She bought no bagged shortcut, no medicated pellet, no wormer she could not pronounce. She had almost no money, and she made that a discipline instead of a shame. The mange went first. It went slow, the way a real healing goes, not all at once, but a little more clear skin every time she caught one up to look, the scruff thinning at the ears and the raw places going quiet and closing. And then one gray morning she picked up a doe she had marked as one of the worst, and she turned it in her hands, and there was nothing wrong with it at all. The bony frames filled next. The ribs that had stood up like tent poles under the hide went under a layer of clean condition, and the hollow flanks rounded, and last of all, and this was the thing she had not known to hope for, the coats came up. A deep-worked gloss rose in the silver-gray, a shine that came from the inside of the animal and not from any brush, so that in a certain slant of evening light a doe, standing up in the tall grass, looked like light lying along oiled wood. She would crouch at the fence at the end of a day with her forearms on her knees and just watch it, that shine moving across the hill, and she did not feel proud exactly. She felt like she was watching something come back that had been trying to come back for a long time. Word of how she was feeding them got to the feed store the way everything got to the feed store, and Vernon Hasseltine had his laugh over it there among the other cap-wearing men. She was not present for it, but she heard it repeated, the way a person always hears the thing said about them. He had said that a woman who bought funeral rabbits and then refused to feed them was just spreading the funeral out over a few extra months to be cruel about it. He had said, and the men had liked this one, that she would lose every head she had by Christmas, and that when she did, he hoped somebody would have the decency to remind her that a full-grown cattleman had told her so in plain daylight, and she had walked on past like she couldn't hear. She heard that too, the part about walking on past. She let it sit in her a day, and then she let it go, because arguing with it would have cost her feelings she needed for the animals, and the animals were the only argument she cared to make. The boy came up the lane in the 3rd week, and she never did find out, that first day, why. Dewey Kettering was 15 or 16. Quiet, in a way that was more than shy. From a place down the road she knew the reputation of, and did not ask him about. He stood at the gate a while like he was deciding, and then he came in, and he did not say anything, and he picked up the water bucket that was standing full by the pump, and he carried it down to the low troughs, and poured it, and came back and filled it, and carried it again. And when it was done, he set the bucket where he had found it, and he left. He did it the next day, too. She let him. Somewhere in the 2nd week of it, she understood that she was watching something she had no right to, which was a boy who had the hands, the thing her grandfather's ledger never named, because there was no way to name it. The thing that could not be put into a person by any amount of teaching, and could only be found already there, the way you find water. Dewey moved among the rabbits, and the rabbits did not scatter from him. He could feel when a doe was off before there was anything to see. He set a fence line true without being shown. She wanted so badly to say something to him about it that her jaw ached with the wanting, and she said nothing, because she had a superstition she could not have defended, that if she named the thing out loud she would frighten it, that it would go back into hiding in the boy the way a wild thing goes to ground, and she would rather have it there unremarked than lose it by making it self-conscious. So she just found more for him to do, and paid him what little she could, and let him become part of the hill without either of them saying that he had. The old man came on a still afternoon in the 4th week. She heard the truck before she saw it, and then Cletus Vandergriff got out of it slow, a thin, stooped man in his 70s, with a pencil behind his ear and a chore coat too warm for the day, and he did not introduce himself so much as let her figure out over the next few minutes who he had to be. He had run heritage rabbits himself, decades back, and taken pelts, and he had heard down the line what she was doing, and had wanted to see was it true. She let him into the pasture. She watched him catch up a doe, and it was in the way he caught it that she understood him. He took it the way a man takes a thing he respects. No fear in his hands, and no roughness either, and he turned it and felt down the spine and along the loin with 2 fingers, and looked at the color in the light, and he was quiet a long time. Then he saw the ledger. She had it open on the tailgate where she had been reading it, and he bent over it without touching it, and he found Willard's hand, and he found the line near the front that she had by then read 100 times, the one underlined so hard it had nearly torn the page, and something moved in the old man's weathered face. "This is not bad stock," Cletus said, straightening up slow with a hand at his back. He looked out over the hill, at the silver shine moving in the grass. "Your grandfather knew his ground. That was all." He did not say it kindly, to make her feel good. He said it flat, as a fact he was certifying, and it was worth more to her than a kind thing would have been worth. She broke her own rule once that season, and she did it knowingly. Willard's ledger said in 2 places not to name them, said a named animal was a hard animal to be sensible about, and she agreed with it, and she did it anyway. There was one doe. She was crook-eared, one ear that had healed with a fold in it so it sat wrong, and she was slow-footed even for the slow-footed strain. Always the last to move off a spot, and she had the biggest appetite in the whole wheel. She would be at the trough when Marable came down, and still there when she left, unhurried, certain, taking her fill of a scant world like it owed her. She was exactly the kind of animal the underlined line was about. Marable took out her green notebook one evening, and she wrote the doe into it. A word she did not entirely choose so much as find already waiting, sable. She looked at the word a while after she had written it. She knew she ought to cross it out. She did not cross it out. The first strong litters came at the turn of the season, and they came the way everything else had come on that hill, without drama and all at once when you looked up. She found a first surviving litter down in the deep of the warren where the crook-eared doe had kindled, 5 kits blind and warm and impossibly whole, and she lifted one in the cup of her dirty hand and carried it up to the house and set it in a shallow bowl of straw on the kitchen window-sill so that Ozella could see it from her chair. And the old woman looked at it a long moment and went back to her peas. A quiet trade started at the county line roadside stand. A person here and a person there who knew what they were looking at. And then one of those persons said something to someone in the city, and a small first sale went out from the hill for a price that was not much, but was more than commodity, and it carried a rumor with it the way a seed carries downhill. She wrote the sale in the ledger under her grandfather's tallies, in her own hand now, pressing down. She did not know yet what the rumor would bring up the Sedgwick road, or how soon, or what the sky was going to do first. It came the way the ledger had warned her it could, which was as weather a while before it came as ruin. She felt it before she understood it, a wrongness in the light, an afternoon gone the color of a bruise, for no reason the clean blue sky above could explain. And then she saw it, and her stomach dropped the way it had not dropped in a year. A wall stood on the northwest ridgeline. It was brown, and it was tall past reckoning, and it shimmered along its face like something alive. And it was coming against the wind, which was the detail that told her old and animal that this was the thing the old people meant. The black duster, the dry year storm the county had let itself forget, could happen at all, because it had been a lifetime since the last one, and a man will forget anything that has not hurt him personally. She stood in the yard and watched it eat the far fields. She watched it take the plowed monocrop ground that the feed store men were so proud of, the clean, straight, worked acres with nothing rooted in them, and the wind stripped that ground down to bare pale hardpan in a matter of minutes, and lifted the topsoil off it and carried it, so that a whole year of a man's field went up into the air and started walking east over the fence lines and the gardens, and the tidy modern sheds. She thought of the confined stock in those sheds, the animals kept close and clean in the way the men had held up against her all summer as the sensible way, and she could not think about it long. She turned to her own. But there was almost nothing to do for her own, and understanding that was the hardest thing the whole day asked of her. The silver-gray rabbits had already gone to ground. They had felt it before she had, and they had done the one thing the deep warren existed to let them do, which was disappear below the world. Down into the run of tunnels Willard's map had taught her to keep open and living, down under the rooted hill where the wind could not reach them, and they rode it out there in the dark below the blowing while the surface of the county came apart. And the hill itself held. That was the thing she watched, with her heart going in her chest. Standing in the doorway with a wet cloth over her mouth, the storm hit her rotated pasture and her rooted tall grass, and the ground she had refused to work twice, and the grass lay down and shuddered and did not let go, The soil bound in a season of patient roots did not lift, so that her hill stayed dark and green and whole as an island in the middle of a county that was standing up into the air and blowing away. At the height of it, when the light went out at mid-afternoon, and the house creaked and the grit came in under the door, she did not do the thing her whole body wanted to do, which was run down there with sacks and smoke and panic and try to save them with her hands. She went into the kitchen instead. She lit the lantern against the brown dark, and she took down the ledger, and she opened it to the weather columns her thumb already knew the place of, and she turned back through the years to the one strange year, the year the pages themselves seemed to hold their breath. And she found there in the margin beside it 3 words in her grandfather's small hand. Let them work. She sat with that. She understood what it was asking, and she understood that it was the hardest instruction in the whole book, because it asked her to do nothing, to trust the deep warren and the rooted hill and the hardy strain to be the things she had spent a year making them, and to keep her own frightened hands out of it. So she did nothing. She sat at the table with the lantern and the storm walking overhead, and she let them work, and it was the most she had ever done for anything. The duster passed the way they pass, the light coming grudging and strange back into a changed world. She went out into it, and the whole county had gone to drift. Fence lines were buried to the top wire in blown soil. The straight, clean fields were bare, pale hardpan gone down inches, and the good ground that had been on them was somewhere to the east now, in the sky, in other men's ditches. And in the middle of it, her hill stood green. Hers was the one rooted hollow in a country turned to dust, the grass gritty, but standing, the warren intact. And when she went down and opened it, the rabbits came up out of the dark, into the strange light alive and whole and shining, the silver-gray gloss dulled with dust, but unmistakably there, the crook-eared doe among them unhurried as ever. She stood in the middle of them and could not speak. From the porch above, Ozella had come out to the rail and was looking down the green hill at the brown ruined county beyond it, and the old woman said only one thing, flat into the settling air, not to Marable, and not to anyone. "The ground remembers," she said, and went back inside. Word of the green field moved faster than the storm had. It went out along the Sedgwick Road within the day, and it brought them within the week, and she watched them come, driving out slow and quiet, the way people drive toward a thing they have heard about and do not quite believe, and half hope to catch out in a lie, easing along the fence line and stopping and just looking at the one hill that had held. Some of them she knew. Some of them were the cap-wearing men who had laughed in the feed store, and she watched a thing happen at her fence that she had not expected and that moved her more than any apology could have, which was that one by one, without seeming to decide to, without any of them making a show of it, those men took off their caps. They stood at the wire of a woman they had mocked, and they held their hats in their hands, and they looked at the green ground and the shining animals, and not one of them had a word to say. Vernon Hasseltine came up the lane 3 days after the duster, and he came on foot, which for a man of his standing and his stiff knees meant a thing that words could not have meant. He left the big diesel truck down at the county road, where the drift had crossed it, and he walked the last quarter-mile through soil that was not his, past the fence line that had held. And Marable watched him come from the doorway of the leaning gray barn, and did not go down to meet him, and did not make it easy. He stopped at the wire. He took off the clean seed company cap, and he did not put it back on. He turned it in both his broad hands, around and around by the brim, the way a man works a thing when his hands need somewhere to go, and for a while He only looked at the rabbits moving glossy and unhurried over the green hollow, while the whole rest of the county lay under a foot of blown topsoil behind him. Then he said it, flat, into the still air, not loud the way he had been loud at the sale barn, not offered up to any crowd. I was wrong. That was all of it. He did not dress it up, and he did not explain it, and he did not ask her for anything, and Maribel understood that the not asking was the dignity he had left, and that she was not going to take it from him. He had earned, by any accounting a person keeps, the right to say a hard word back to him. She had the whole winter of his laughing stored up, and she could have spent it right there, and he would have stood and taken it. She looked at him a moment, at the gray stubble and the ruddy face gone quiet, and she found she did not want the word after all. She went into the barn instead, and came back with a low-woven basket, and in it were 4 of the heavy, slow-footed does. The deep Warren blood, the thing itself, and she set it in his hands where the cap had been. "Start them loose," she said. "Give the ground time to answer." He looked down into the basket a long time. Then he nodded once, the way the old men nodded when a thing had been settled that would not need saying again, and he carried them back down the lane the whole quarter-mile cradled against his chest like something that could spill. The white van came out the Sedgwick Road the following week, easing over the drifts, and Silvana Petrucci got down from it in her small round glasses and her clean canvas apron, and did not say a word about the weather or the drive. She walked the pasture instead. She crouched at the fence line and put her hand flat to the rooted grass and asked the questions a person asks who has spent a life learning what a thing is worth by handling it. How long on the tall grass? How scant the feed? How many crossings before the ground was let to rest? And she listened to the answers the way Cletus had listened, which was all the way down. When she tasted the meat that evening at the kitchen table, she went still, the particular stillness of a person recalculating something they had thought they already knew, and she named a price 4 times the commodity board and said it plainly, as a fact, and not a favor. Then she asked to photograph the pelts and the open ledger together, the silver gray and Willard's underlined pencil line side by side in the lantern light, and she framed them the way a person frames a thing they mean to remember exactly. She asked to be first in line next year. She asked to be first the year after that. Cletus Vandergriff came in the low cold season to help set the next breeding, moving down the wheel of the Warren with his pencil behind his ear, lifting the does and turning them in his calloused hands and saying almost nothing, which from him was the highest form of speech. Over the best of the silver-gray blood he stopped and looked a while and said only, "These will hold," and Maribel wrote it into her green notebook that night by the lantern and underlined it, pressing the pencil down hard the way her grandfather had pressed his. And then, quietly, in her own time and asking nothing of anyone, Ozella Ridley died in her own bed with the window open to the tall grass. It was the closest thing to a blessing the country handed out, to go like that, in your own room, with your own air moving over you, and she took it the way she had taken everything, without fuss. She left a note in her spidery hand in the drawer by the bed, only a line of it, that the place should go toward the one who had the hands, and there was no need for her to write the name because everyone on the hill already knew she meant Dewey Kettering. The winter came in clean and cold over a hill that had held when the county blew, and one still evening Maribel sat at the kitchen table with the cloth-bound ledger open and wrote the head count tally beneath her grandfather's in her own hand, 90 bought and more than 90 carried through, the strain alive and glossy and bred true, and she looked at the underlined line near the front that she now knew by heart. The breeds people gave up on are the ones that will matter, and found it proved entirely, every word of it, on the same wind that had carried it the first time. What she felt was not triumph, and it was not vindication. It was something older and quieter than either of those, with the grief for Ozella folded all through the gratitude, so that she could not have pulled the two apart if she had tried. Out in the warm light of the barn, the crook-eared Silver, though she had let herself name, Sable, dozed in the straw with the slow ease of an animal that had never once doubted the ground. Marable pressed her own green notebook into Dewey's hands, and a single pressed feather with it, and she did not make a speech, because the boy had the hands, and the hands did not need the speech. If you have ever been told the thing you love isn't worth much, share this with someone who needs to hear it come out different in the end. And down in the comments, tell me the small, stubborn thing you kept on with anyway, when everyone said to quit, and the town you're watching from. I read every comment, every single one.